I'm Stephanie Walker, 35, and last month I discovered my entire family gathered for our annual reunion without me. 10 years of building my life from nothing. And they still decided I wasn't worth including. The photos on Facebook showed them all smiling in the backyard where I grew up, acting like I never existed. What they didn't know was how much had changed. Before I tell you how my family's smiles disappeared when they showed up uninvited at my doorstep, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever felt betrayed by family, hit that subscribe button because this story might just give you the validation you need. Growing up in Lansing, Michigan, our family looked perfect from the outside. My parents, Margaret and Richard Walker, had 3 children and a comfortable middle-class life. Dad ran a moderately successful construction business, Mom worked as an administrative assistant at the local high school, and we lived in a decent 4-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. But behind closed doors, the dynamics were far from ideal. As the middle child between my older sister Grace and younger brother Brandon, I always felt like the forgotten one. Grace was the academic superstar, valedictorian, debate team captain, and eventually pre-med at University of Michigan. Brandon was the charming athlete who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, even when his grades were mediocre. And then there was me, creative, sensitive, and constantly being told my dreams were impractical. Stephanie, why can't you focus on something useful like your sister? Mom would ask whenever she caught me sketching design ideas instead of studying for chemistry. Art won't pay the bills. My father was even more direct. No daughter of mine is wasting her life drawing pictures, he declared when I mentioned wanting to study interior design. You'll get a business degree like Grace did before med school. That's something you can fall back on. The pattern was consistent throughout my childhood. When Grace needed a new scientific calculator for advanced placement classes, my parents bought it without question. When Brandon needed expensive baseball equipment, the money appeared instantly. But when I needed art supplies or design software for a class project, I was told to make do with what we had. The financial disparities became even more apparent when we reached college age. My parents covered Grace's undergraduate tuition completely, even though she had scholarship offers. They also fully funded Brandon's business degree despite his mediocre grades. For me, the conversation was different. We've already stretched ourselves thin with your siblings' education, Dad explained during my senior year of high school. You'll need to take out loans and work part-time. It'll build character. I worked 30 hours a week at a local coffee shop while carrying a full-course load at the state university. Meanwhile, Brandon was given a monthly allowance so he could focus on his studies without the distraction of a job. The inequity was glaring, but any time I mentioned it, I was labeled as jealous and ungrateful. Your brother has networking to do for his future business connections, Mom would explain. And Grace needs perfect grades for medical school. Your situation is different. Different indeed. My situation was that my passions weren't valued, my abilities weren't respected, and my struggles weren't acknowledged. The only person who ever seemed to see me was my Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister. Aunt Caroline was everything my mother wasn't: creative, free-spirited, and supportive of my artistic ambitions. She'd been an event planner in Chicago before retiring early after a successful career, and she recognized my eye for design immediately. You have a gift, Stephanie, she told me during one of her visits when I was 16. She had found my sketchbook of room redesigns while everyone else was watching Brandon's baseball game. The way you understand how spaces work together, that's not something that can be taught. Her words were like water in a desert. For once, someone was seeing value in what I loved. When I graduated high school with honors despite my work schedule, my parents' response was tepid at best. At least you finished strong, Dad said, as if he'd expected me to fail. At Grace's graduation, he had rented a banquet hall for a celebration. For mine, we had a small dinner at home. Brandon, 3 years younger than me, didn't even attend my graduation ceremony. He has an important game that day, my mother explained, as if that settled everything. I sat through the ceremony with only my parents and Aunt Caroline in attendance, while Grace was too busy with med school preparations to make it. These weren't isolated incidents. but pieces of a clear pattern that defined my place in our family. I was the afterthought. The less than, the one whose achievements were acknowledged with surprise rather than pride. By my junior year of college, I had stopped expecting anything different. I put myself through school, worked multiple jobs, and maintained a 3.8 GPA in my design courses. I built a small portfolio by volunteering to redesign spaces for local nonprofits, working nights and weekends for nothing but experience and references. "You're building something real," Aunt Caroline told me during one of our regular phone calls. She was the only one who checked in consistently to see how I was doing. "Your parents might not see it now, but you're creating a foundation for something extraordinary." I clung to her words like a lifeline, especially on nights when exhaustion and doubt crept in. When my final design project won departmental recognition and my professor suggested I apply for a prestigious internship in California, I called Aunt Caroline first, knowing my parents' reaction would only diminish my achievement. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice warm with genuine emotion. "You've earned this through talent and hard work, not because anyone handed it to you." The contrast between her reaction and my family's couldn't have been starker. When I finally told my parents about the award and potential internship, my father frowned. "California is expensive," he said dismissively. "Be realistic, Stephanie. Maybe look for something local after graduation. Your mother's friend Nancy might have an opening at her real estate office." "That's adjacent to your interest in houses, isn't it?" "Adjacent to my interest." As if my passion for design was a hobby to be accommodated rather than a career to be pursued. As if 4 years of education and countless hours of work could be satisfied by filing paperwork at a suburban real estate office. I stopped sharing my dreams with them after that. I applied for the internship in secret, interviewed via Skype during my lunch break at work, and made plans quietly. Aunt Caroline was my confidant and cheerleader through it all. When the acceptance letter came, she was the first person I called. "They're offering me the internship and a stipend," I told her, my voice shaking with excitement. "It's not much money, but it's a foot in the door with one of the best design firms on the West Coast." "This is just the beginning," Aunt Caroline assured me. "They wouldn't have selected you if they didn't see what I see in you." As graduation approached, I knew I needed to tell my family about my plans. I had no illusions about their reaction, but I refused to slink away without standing up for my choice. Little did I know that the upcoming annual family reunion would become the breaking point that would change the course of my life forever. Our family reunions were always held on the last weekend of June, ostensibly to celebrate multiple summer birthdays together, but really to showcase whatever new achievements Grace or Brandon had accumulated. The reunion 10 years ago was meant to be special. Grace had just been accepted to her residency program, and Brandon had landed an internship at a local financial firm. I had graduated 2 weeks earlier with honors in interior design, and the California internship was set to begin in August. Despite knowing what would likely happen, I decided to announce my plans at the reunion. Part of me still hoped, foolishly perhaps, that they might finally see my accomplishments as worthy of celebration too. The gathering was at my parents' house as usual, with extended family and a few close friends in attendance. Aunt Caroline had flown in from Chicago, giving me at least one ally in the crowd. Grace was holding court on the patio, detailing her upcoming residency to our captivated relatives. Brandon was by the grill with Dad, undoubtedly discussing his promising future in finance. I found myself in the kitchen with my mother and 2 of her sisters, helping to prepare the side dishes. It seemed as good a time as any to share my news. "I've accepted an internship with Westridge Design in San Francisco," I said, trying to keep my voice casual as I sliced cucumbers for the salad. "They're one of the top firms in the country. I start in August." My mother paused midway through stirring her famous potato salad. "California? That's rather extreme, isn't it? I thought we discussed looking for something local." "You discussed it, Mom." "I never agreed to it," I replied, continuing to slice vegetables. "This is an incredible opportunity. Thousands of design graduates applied." My Aunt Deborah, always eager to stir the pot, called out toward the patio. "Margaret, did you know Stephanie is moving to California?" "Apparently." She's got some kind of art job. The kitchen quickly filled as my announcement drew attention. My father entered, his expression darkening as my mother filled him in. California? Absolutely not, he declared, as if I were still 16 instead of a college graduate. That's the most irresponsible thing I've ever heard. You have student loans to pay off. Which is exactly why I need this job, I countered. It's with a prestigious firm. This could launch my career. Grace joined the fray, her tone condescending. Stephanie, be realistic. What kind of career are you expecting from interior decorating? It's not exactly medicine. It's interior design, not decorating, I corrected, feeling my cheeks flush. And it's what I've spent 4 years studying. Brandon, never one to miss piling on, added his unwelcome opinion. Come on, sis. You're not exactly Grace. No offense. But maybe I'm a little lower? Dad could probably get you something at his office. You know, filing or answering phones. The dismissal in his voice made something snap inside me. For years of working myself to exhaustion while watching my siblings receive everything on a silver platter culminated in that moment. Lower? I've worked twice as hard as you ever have. I shot back. I put myself through college while you got a free ride and barely passed your classes. I earned this opportunity. The room fell silent. I had broken the unspoken rule of our family. Never challenge the golden children. My father's face reddened. That's enough, Stephanie. Your brother has a practical career path. What you're chasing is a wasteful dream that won't pay the bills. I won't support this California nonsense. I'm not asking for your support, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm informing you of my decision. Well, if that's your attitude, don't expect any financial help from us, he retorted. You want to make this mistake, you do it on your own dime. I laughed bitterly. When have I ever not been on my own dime? You paid for their educations while I worked 30-hour weeks. You bought Grace a car for graduation while I took the bus. You're funding Brandon's apartment while I've been living with roommates to save money. Nothing's changing except my address. The ugly truth hung in the air. No one denied the disparity because they couldn't. It was written in every decision they'd made for years. You're being dramatic, my mother finally said, her tone dismissive. We've always supported all our children equally. That's a lie and everyone in this room knows it, I responded, no longer concerned about keeping the peace. You've never believed in me or my abilities. You've never valued what I'm good at. And you've certainly never supported me the way you've supported them. Brandon stepped forward. His face contorted with anger. You know what your problem is? You're jealous because you don't have what it takes to succeed like we do. You'll go to California, waste a few years, and come crawling back when your little drawing hobby doesn't work out. And you know what? We'll probably have to bail you out, like always. Like always. I was incredulous. When have you ever had to bail me out? I've been self-sufficient since I was 18 because I had no choice. My father cut in, his voice hard. That's enough. You want to throw away your future on this foolishness, fine. But don't come crying to us when you fail. And you will fail, Stephanie. You don't have what it takes to make it in the real world. The words struck like physical blows. After years of subtle undermining, the truth was finally laid bare. They genuinely believed I would amount to nothing. In the tense silence that followed, Aunt Caroline stood up from her corner of the kitchen. I think that's quite enough, she said firmly. Stephanie has worked incredibly hard for this opportunity, and anyone with eyes can see she has extraordinary talent. If you can't be supportive, at least have the decency not to actively undermine her. My father turned his glare to her. Stay out of this, Caroline. This is family business. She is family, Aunt Caroline replied sharply, though you seem to have forgotten that fact. The reunion effectively ended for me at that moment. I walked out of the kitchen, packed my overnight bag, and headed for the door. My mother followed me to the entryway. Her expression a mixture of frustration and confusion. You're overreacting, she said. Just sleep on it, and we can discuss realistic options tomorrow. There's nothing to discuss, I told her. I've made my decision. I'm moving to California in August. Then don't expect anything from us, she replied, her voice hardening. Not money, not help, nothing. I never have, I said quietly, and walked out the door. Aunt Caroline found me sitting in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel though I hadn't started the engine. She slipped into the passenger seat without a word and placed an envelope in my lap. I was going to give you this as a graduation present, she said. But I think you need it now. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a card that read, "To New Beginnings. I believe in you." I looked up at her, tears streaming down my face. Thank you for being the one person who sees me. She squeezed my hand. They're wrong about you, Stephanie. I've always known it, and soon everyone else will too. Promise me you won't let their limitations become yours. That night, as I drove back to my apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would never return to this town, to this family, until I had built something so undeniably successful that even they couldn't diminish it. Little did I know then how completely that promise would transform my life. California wasn't the glamorous fresh start I'd imagined. My first apartment in San Francisco was a 400-square-foot studio with perpetually leaking pipes and a view of the building's air shaft. The internship stipend barely covered rent, so I picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop and evening hours at a home goods store for employee discounts on design books and materials. My days began at 5 a.m. with the opening shift at the coffee shop, followed by 9 hours at the design firm. Then either another coffee shift or study time at the local library where I taught myself additional software skills. Sleep became a luxury, proper meals an afterthought. The internship itself was both exhilarating and humbling. Westridge Design handled high-end residential and commercial projects, and as the newest intern, my tasks were decidedly unglamorous, organizing material libraries, creating digital file systems, and occasionally fetching coffee for the senior designers. 3 months in, exhaustion caught up with me. I was sitting alone in the break room, fighting back tears after being harshly criticized for a minor filing error, when Diana Westridge herself walked in. In her mid-50s with silver-streaked black hair and impeccable style, she was a legend in the design world and the firm's founder. Rough day? She asked, pouring herself tea. I quickly wiped my eyes. Nothing I can't handle. Something in my voice must have interested her because instead of leaving, she sat down across from me. You're the new intern from Michigan, right? Stephanie. Surprised she knew my name, I nodded. Show me your portfolio, she said unexpectedly. The real one, not what you submitted for the internship. I want to see what you do when no one's grading you. That evening, I stayed late and walked Diana through my personal design concepts, ideas I'd been developing at night but had told myself weren't polished enough to show anyone. I explained my philosophy about spaces that transform with people's lives, about sustainable luxury and emotional resonance in design. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. You have a unique perspective, she finally said. Raw, but there's something there. Most young designers try to copy what's already successful. You're trying to create something new. The next day, I was reassigned to her personal team as a junior assistant. The work was still demanding, the hours still long, but now I was learning directly from one of the best in the industry. Diana was exacting but fair, pushing me harder than anyone ever had because, as she later told me, she saw potential worth developing. 6 months later, a small local cafe hired the firm for a redesign. It was a modest project by the firm's standards, and Diana handed it to me as my first lead assignment. Don't make it pretty, she advised. Make it memorable. I poured everything into that cafe design, creating a space that transformed from morning workspace to evening social hub through clever lighting, movable partitions, and dual-purpose furnishings. When it opened, the owners credited the design for doubling their expected business. Local design blogs featured it. And suddenly my name was attached to something successful. Diana's mentorship continued, and with it my confidence grew. I started contributing ideas in client meetings, developed my own design voice, and gradually took on larger projects. By my 3rd year at Westridge, I was managing small residential redesigns independently and contributing to major commercial projects. Outside of work, life was evolving too. I'd moved to a slightly larger apartment in a diverse neighborhood I loved. I'd made friends, particularly Melissa, a chef at a local restaurant, and Tyler, a software engineer who lived in my building. They became my California family, the people who celebrated my small victories and helped me through inevitable setbacks. Meanwhile, contact with my actual family dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional update to Aunt Caroline, who visited me twice a year. My parents never asked about my work, focusing instead on Grace's medical career or Brandon's progress at my father's construction company, which he'd joined after college. I stopped volunteering information about my achievements, tired of having them minimized. My 5th year in California marked a turning point. Diana called me into her office one spring morning and closed the door, usually a sign of either exceptional praise or serious problems. "I'm launching a boutique division focused on sustainable luxury design," she announced. "I want you to run it." The promotion came with a substantial salary increase and a title, Associate Design Director. For the first time, I was financially comfortable rather than just scraping by. I moved to a lovely one-bedroom apartment with a small office nook, bought my first new car, and began building savings. The boutique division thrived under my direction. Our sustainable approach resonated with a growing clientele concerned about environmental impact without wanting to sacrifice aesthetics. We were featured in several major design publications, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences. In my 7th year in California, Diana approached me with an unexpected proposition. She was planning a phased retirement and wanted to restructure the company. "I'd like you to become a partner," she said. "You'd buy in gradually over 5 years. By the time I fully retire, you'd be positioned to take over the firm." It was an extraordinary opportunity that would require all my savings and a business loan, but the potential was enormous. After careful consideration and many conversations with my small circle of trusted friends, I agreed. The day I signed the partnership papers, I called Aunt Caroline. "I wish I could have seen their faces if they knew," she said, referring to my family. "From the girl they said would amount to nothing to a partner in one of the country's premier design firms." "They still don't need to know," I replied. I'd stopped seeking their approval years ago. 3 months later, Aunt Caroline was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I flew to Chicago immediately and spent a week helping her get affairs in order. Despite her illness, she was characteristically positive. "I've had a wonderful life," she told me, "and watching you thrive has been one of my greatest joys." She passed away 4 months later. I was by her side, having flown in every weekend to be with her. My parents and siblings attended the funeral, but we barely spoke. The distance between us had calcified into something permanent and cold. After Caroline's death, I threw myself into work. The firm continued to grow, and I launched a line of sustainable furniture that received international attention. By my 9th year in California, I had enough success and capital to make a decision I'd been contemplating for some time, establishing my own firm. Diana was supportive, helping me through the transition and even referring clients she thought would be perfect for my distinctive approach. Renewed Spaces opened with 5 employees and a carefully selected client list. Within 6 months, we had a waiting list and had doubled our staff. The ultimate symbol of my transformation came in my 10th year away from Michigan. After an extensive search, I found my dream home, a mid-century modern house in the Berkeley Hills with spectacular views of the bay. The previous owners had maintained its architectural integrity, but neglected the interiors. It was the perfect canvas. I spent months redesigning every inch of that house, creating a space that reflected everything I'd learned and become. Sustainable materials, innovative technology, and deeply personal touches combined to make it not just a showcase of my professional abilities, but a true sanctuary. The house was featured in Architectural Digest the same month I received news that Renewed Spaces had been nominated for a prestigious industry award. After a decade of relentless work, sacrifice, and growth, I had built something undeniably successful. I had proven my family wrong in every possible way. What I hadn't anticipated was how little their validation mattered to me anymore. The girl desperate for her family's approval had been replaced by a woman secure in her own worth. I no longer needed them to see me I saw myself clearly, and that was enough. Or so I thought. Until the day I scrolled through Instagram and saw my entire family gathered for the annual reunion. Everyone smiling, everyone included, everyone except me. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening. I just finished a client meeting and was relaxing with a glass of wine, scrolling through social media when I saw it. A photo posted by my cousin Rebecca. The entire Walker family gathered in my parents' backyard, everyone smiling beneath the banner that read Annual Family Reunion 2023. My sister Grace stood front and center, visibly pregnant, flanked by her husband and 2 children. Next to them, my brother Brandon with his arm around his wife, both beaming. My parents sat in lawn chairs looking older but content, surrounded by aunts, uncles, cousins, every branch of our family tree represented. Every branch except mine. I stared at the image, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. 10 years had passed since I'd left Michigan. 10 years of building a life, achieving success beyond what even I had imagined possible. And they still hadn't thought to include me in the family gathering. The caption made it worse. Complete family reunion. Everyone who matters is here. Everyone who matters. The words burned like acid. I continued scrolling through the album. Dozens of photos documenting a weekend of barbecues, games, and celebrations. In one image, my father stood proudly beside Brandon, cutting a cake that read, "Congratulations on your promotion." Another showed everyone gathered around Grace while she opened gifts for her expected 3rd child. My finger hovered over the comment section, where relatives had gushed about what a perfect gathering it had been. Then a direct message notification appeared from Rebecca. "Hey Steph, saw you viewed the reunion pics. Sorry you weren't invited. Your parents thought it would be uncomfortable given how long it's been. Hope you're doing well in California. Sorry you weren't invited." As if my exclusion had been an oversight rather than a deliberate choice. As if a decade of estrangement justified erasing me from family events. As if I were a distant acquaintance rather than their daughter, their sister. I set my phone down, hands shaking. After all this time, it shouldn't have hurt. I'd built a successful business, created a beautiful home, cultivated meaningful friendships. I had moved on. Or at least, I thought I had. My phone rang, Aunt Caroline's name appearing on my caller ID. For a disorienting moment, I forgot she was gone. It was her old number, now belonging to her daughter, my cousin Julia. "Stephanie? It's Julia. I'm calling about the reunion." I braced myself. I saw the photos. "Mom would have hated what they did," Julia said, her voice tight with anger. "She fought with them about not inviting you, you know. Before she passed. She made me promise to tell you if they ever pulled something like this." I hadn't known. The thought of Aunt Caroline defending me even during her illness brought fresh tears. What was the reunion even for? I asked. Besides the usual annual gathering. Julia sighed. 2 things. Brandon got promoted to vice president at your dad's company. And Grace announced she's having twins. It was basically a weekend of everyone fawning over them, as usual. Some things never changed. "There's more," Julia continued hesitantly. "I thought you should know. Your name came up a few times and, well, they've been telling people you struggled in California. That you're barely getting by as an interior decorator, and too proud to admit it." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "Uncle Richard mentioned something about you playing at running a business and how you'd never had practical sense." Aunt Margaret nodded along. I tried to say something, but everyone acted like they knew better. The revelation stunned me. Not only had they excluded me, but they'd been actively diminishing my achievements, rewriting my story to fit their narrative of my inevitable failure. After ending the call with Julia, I sat in my award-winning living room, surrounded by evidence of my success, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of their betrayal. I cried for the first time in years, not for who they were, but for who they'd never been and would never be. The next morning, I called Dr. Mitchell, the therapist I'd been seeing intermittently since my 2nd year in California. "What I'm hearing," she said after I recounted everything, "is that you're mourning the final death of a hope you didn't realize you still carried. The hope that somehow, someday, they would see your worth." She was right. Despite everything. Some childish part of me had still been waiting for their acknowledgement, their pride, their love. "So what now?" I asked. "Now you fully release that hope," she replied gently. "You recognize that their inability to value you reflects their limitations, not yours. And you decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want going forward, not based on who you wish they were, but who they've repeatedly shown themselves to be." That evening, I invited Melissa and Tyler over for dinner. As we sat on my terrace overlooking the twinkling lights of San Francisco, I shared the reunion photos and what Julia had told me. "Those absolute jerks," Melissa fumed, refilling my wine glass. "After everything you've accomplished." Tyler, always the more analytical one, looked thoughtful. "Have you ever shown them what you've built? Not that you owe them proof, but maybe they genuinely don't know. They've never asked." I replied. "Not once in 10 years has anyone except Aunt Caroline asked about my work or my life." "Their loss," Melissa declared, raising her glass. "To chosen family, the people who see us clearly and love us anyway." We clinked glasses, and for the first time since seeing those reunion photos, I felt centered again. These were my people, the ones who had celebrated every victory and supported me through every setback. They were more family to me than those connected by blood had ever been. I decided that night to let go, truly let go, of any lingering hope for my family's approval. I would stop checking their social media, stop wondering what they thought, stop giving them space in my mind and heart they hadn't earned. 3 days later, that resolution was tested when my phone rang with my mother's number, the first direct contact I'd had with her in over a year. "Stephanie," she said, her voice sounding older than I remembered. "We need to talk." What followed was a conversation that would upend my carefully constructed new life and force me to confront the family I'd thought I'd finally put behind me. "Your father's business is failing," my mother said without preamble. No hello, no how are you, no acknowledgement of the reunion from which I'd been excluded. I sat down at my kitchen island, caught off guard by the abrupt statement. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied carefully. "The recession hit construction hard, and then there were some poor investments," she continued. "We're losing the house, Stephanie. The bank is foreclosing. The family home, the setting of both warm childhood memories and painful rejections, was being taken away. Despite everything." The news sent a pang through my chest. "That's terrible," I said. "But I'm not sure why you're calling me about it." A heavy pause followed. "We need somewhere to stay for a while. Just until we figure things out. Brandon's house is too small with the baby, and Grace is having twins soon." The request hung in the air, its presumption stunning. After a decade of minimal contact, after excluding me from family gatherings, after spreading falsehoods about my career, they were asking to stay with me. "You want to stay with me?" I repeated slowly. "In California. Just for the holidays," my mother clarified. "We need to be out by December 15th, and finding a rental during Christmas is impossible. It would just be until January, maybe February at the latest. Your father thinks he can restart the business by spring." I nearly laughed at the audacity. "Mom, we haven't spoken properly in years. You didn't even invite me to the family reunion last month." "That was different," she dismissed. "We didn't think you'd want to come all this way just for a weekend." "You didn't think to ask me," I corrected. "And now you're asking to live with me." "We're family, Stephanie," she said, as if that explained and excused everything. Family helps each other in times of need. Family. The word that had been weaponized against me my entire life, used to demand my compliance, silence my objections, and minimize my needs. "I need to think about this," I told her. "I'll call you back." After hanging up, I paced my living room, thoughts swirling. The rational part of me wanted to refuse immediately. They had never been there for me. Why should I append my life for them? But another part, the part that still remembered being a little girl desperate for her parents' approval, hesitated. I called Dr. Mitchell and scheduled an emergency session for that afternoon. "This is a complex situation," she acknowledged after I explained. "On one hand, helping family in crisis can be a compassionate choice. On the other hand, given your history, it's reasonable to have serious concerns about boundaries and respect." "They've never even seen my home," I said. They don't know anything about my life here. That's an important point, Dr. Mitchell noted. What do you think they're expecting to find? The question stopped me short. Based on what Julia had revealed about their assumptions regarding my career, they probably imagined I lived in a modest apartment, perhaps struggling to make ends meet while playing at running a business. They have no idea who I've become, I realized aloud. And how do you feel about showing them? That evening, I invited Melissa and Tyler over again to help me think through the situation. Absolutely not, was Melissa's immediate response. After how they've treated you, they'd probably criticize your decor while eating your food. Tyler was more measured. It's your decision, but if you do this, you need clear boundaries. Timeline, expectations, house rules, everything in writing before they arrive. I'm worried they'll take advantage, I admitted. They always have. Then don't do it, Melissa said simply. You don't owe them anything. But if I refuse, I'm confirming every negative thing they've ever thought about me, I argued, surprising myself with the admission. Tyler gave me a serious look. Is that still important to you? What they think? His question cut to the heart of my dilemma. After all these years, was I still seeking their approval? Or was this an opportunity to finally show them who I'd become, not for their validation, but for my own closure? After my friends left, I sat alone in my beautiful home, considering what it would mean to have my family here. This space represented everything I'd accomplished without their support or belief. Part of me wanted them to see it, to witness the success they'd predicted I'd never achieve. The next morning, I called my mother back. You can stay, I told her, but there are conditions. Of course, anything, she agreed quickly. Too quickly. You'll need to arrange your own transportation from the airport. I'll be busy with end-of-year client projects. You can stay through January 15th. After that, you'll need other arrangements. And I'll need the exact dates and the names of everyone coming. It's just your father and me, she assured me. And will be no trouble at all. We're just so grateful, Stephanie. I knew we could count on you. Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. I'll send you my address and some information about the area. Let me know your arrival date once you've booked flights. After hanging up, I began preparing for their visit. I arranged with my assistant to clear my schedule as much as possible, knowing I'd need mental space to deal with whatever dynamics emerged. I deep-cleaned the guest rooms and stocked the kitchen with basics. Then, on Tyler's advice, I installed discreet security cameras in the common areas of the house. I'm not suggesting they'd steal, he clarified when I questioned the necessity. But having a record of interactions might be helpful if boundaries are crossed. A week before their arrival, my mother called again. Slight change of plans, she began, her voice overly casual. Brandon and his wife are coming too. Their heating system broke, and with winter approaching. And since you have all that space. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 silently. You told me it would just be you and Dad. Well, yes, but circumstances changed, she replied. That's not a problem, is it? Brandon says your place must be big enough if you're running a business from home. The assumption that I operated a struggling home business rather than a thriving design firm with commercial offices confirmed what Julia had told me about their perception of my career. Fine. I agreed reluctantly. Brandon and Allison can have the second guest room. 2 days later, another call. Grace and her husband were coming too, with their 2 children. Could they use the home office as a bedroom? It had a daybed, after all. By the time I received the final itinerary, what had started as hosting my parents had expanded to include both siblings, their spouses, and Grace's children. 7 adults and 2 kids in total, descending on my home for nearly a month. As I made final preparations, arranging extra towels and confirming food deliveries, I found myself standing in my living room, taking in the space I'd created. The custom furniture, the original artwork, the carefully considered details that reflected both my professional expertise and personal journey. For years, I'd built this life separate from them, protected from their judgment and dismissal. Now I was voluntarily bringing them into my sanctuary. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Whatever happened, this visit would change things permanently. Either they would finally see me for who I'd become, or I would finally accept that they never would. Either way, it was time to close this chapter of seeking validation from people who had consistently shown they couldn't or wouldn't provide it. As I placed fresh flowers in the guest rooms, I felt a curious sense of calm. For the first time, I would be encountering my family not as the desperate-to-please daughter or the rebellious outsider, but as a successful woman secure in her own achievements, welcoming them into the world I'd created without them. The night before their arrival, I stood on my terrace overlooking the bay, the lights of San Francisco twinkling below. Tomorrow, the family that had once predicted my failure would see firsthand the life I'd built. Their reactions, positive or negative, couldn't change what I knew to be true. I had succeeded beyond even my own expectations, not in spite of their lack of faith, but because their dismissal had fueled a determination they could never understand. I was ready for them to see the real me, perhaps for the first time. The day of my family's arrival dawned clear and crisp, a perfect December morning in the Berkeley Hills. I'd arranged for a car service to bring them from the airport, wanting their first impression of my home to be the full experience. The winding drive up through the hills, the discreet but elegant entrance gate, the panoramic views that unfolded as they approached the house. From my home office window, I watched their van pull into the circular driveway. Even from a distance, I could see their expressions as they took in the property. The modernist architecture, the meticulously landscaped grounds, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering glimpses into the stylish interior. My father stopped mid-step, staring up at the house with his mouth slightly open. My mother clutched her purse tighter, as if bracing herself. Brandon and Grace exchanged glances I couldn't quite interpret. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the front door, smoothing down my silk blouse and straightening my shoulders. This was my home, my success, my life. I wouldn't apologize for any of it. "Welcome to California," I said, opening the door before they could ring the bell. The awkwardness was immediate and palpable. My mother stepped forward first, offering a stiff hug. "Stephanie, this is quite a place," she said, her eyes darting around the entryway with its soaring ceiling and statement chandelier. My father simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Didn't realize interior decorators did so well," he finally commented. Emphasis on decorators, making clear he still didn't respect my profession. "Interior designer," I corrected calmly. "And I own the firm, Dad. Renewed Spaces has 17 employees and offices in San Francisco and Los Angeles." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing more. Brandon pushed forward, his wife Allison and their luggage in tow. "Nice dig, sis." "Renting." "I own it," I replied, noticing the flash of surprise across his face. "Let me show you all to your rooms so you can freshen up after your flight." The tour of the house produced similar reactions, carefully modulated compliments undercut by subtle digs and probing questions about costs, as if they were trying to find the catch. The evidence that my success wasn't quite real. "This furniture must have cost a fortune," Grace remarked, running her hand along my custom dining table. "I designed most of it myself," I explained. "It's from my sustainable luxury line." "You have a furniture line?" her husband Tom asked, genuine surprise in his voice. Among other things, I confirmed, enjoying his reaction. At least someone seemed impressed. We settled into an uneasy coexistence over dinner, everyone careful to keep conversation light, the children's school activities, the weather in Michigan versus California, safe topics that wouldn't disturb the fragile peace. It wasn't until after the kids were put to bed in the makeshift bedroom I'd created in my home office that the real dynamics began to surface. My father, loosened by several glasses of the expensive wine I'd served, began examining my living room more overtly, picking up decorative objects and checking their undersides for price tags or maker's marks. "Dad, can I help you find something?" I asked pointedly. "Just curious what all this stuff costs," he replied without embarrassment. "This place must set you back quite a bit." "I do well," I said simply. "The design industry has been good to me." "Can't be just interior decorating," he pressed. "You must have other income." "Trust fund? Wealthy boyfriend?" The implication was clear. He couldn't believe I'd achieved this through my own work, the very career he'd dismissed a decade ago. My firm handles high-end residential and commercial projects throughout California and recently expanded to New York and Chicago, I explained, keeping my voice level. We also have product lines, consulting contracts, and licensing deals. I assure you, everything you see comes from my work. My mother intervened, perhaps sensing the building tension. It's just surprising, Stephanie. You never mentioned how established you'd become. You never asked, I replied quietly. Not once in 10 years. An uncomfortable silence fell. Brandon broke it with a forced laugh. Well, you didn't exactly keep in touch either, sis. For all we knew, you were struggling, but too proud to admit it. Is that what you've been telling people? I asked, remembering Julia's revelation. That I was struggling. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. My mother busied herself rearranging the throw pillows on the sofa, avoiding my eyes. We just assumed, Grace offered, her tone condescending. Most creative ventures fail. Statistically speaking. And you left with basically nothing. I left with my education and talent, I corrected. And determination you apparently still don't appreciate. My father set down his wine glass with more force than necessary. Now listen here, there's no need for attitude. We're just surprised, that's all. You can't blame us for assuming the worst when you cut yourself off from the family. I cut myself off. The incredulity in my voice was unmistakable. You told me I would fail. You refused to support my career choice. You've excluded me from family events for years, including the recent reunion I had to discover through social media. You were in California. My mother protested weakly. We didn't think you'd want to come all that way. You didn't think to ask me, I pointed out. Just like you never thought to ask about my business or my life. And yet here you are, in my home, because suddenly you need something from me. The truth hung in the air between us, uncomfortable and undeniable. Brandon shifted in his seat, exchanging glances with his wife. Speaking of that, he began cautiously, I've been meaning to talk to you about a business opportunity. Brandon, my mother warned quietly. But he continued. Look, you're obviously doing well, and Dad's company is going through a rough patch. We were thinking maybe you could invest? Help the family business? With your resources. It would be a small thing for you, but would make a huge difference for us. And there it was, the real reason behind this sudden family reunion. Not reconciliation, not genuine interest in my life, but financial need. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. For 10 years, none of you bothered to learn anything about my career. You told relatives I was struggling. You excluded me from family gatherings. And now you want me to invest in the very business whose owner, my father, told me I would never amount to anything? Brandon had the grace to look uncomfortable, but pressed on. Water under the bridge, right? Family helps family. I laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Family helps family? Where was that sentiment when I was working 30-hour weeks to put myself through college? When I moved across the country with nothing but Aunt Caroline's gift to support me? When I was building my business from scratch without a single word of encouragement from any of you? My father's face darkened. That's enough, Stephanie. We get it. You've done well for yourself. No need to throw it in our faces. I'm not throwing anything in your faces, I replied. I'm simply pointing out the hypocrisy of invoking family obligation now, when it benefits you, after years of treating me like I barely existed. Grace, always the peacemaker when it suited her, intervened. Let's all calm down. We're here now, trying to reconnect. Isn't that what matters? Are you reconnecting, though? I challenged. Or are you here because you need a free place to stay and possibly financial help? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks very much like the latter. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. My mother's eyes filled with tears, whether genuine or strategic, I couldn't tell anymore. My father's face had settled into the stern disapproval I remembered from childhood, while Brandon looked frustrated that his pitch wasn't going as planned. I think, I said carefully, that we all need to be honest about why you're here and what you're expecting from this visit. Because if it's just about money and a place to stay, we should establish that clearly rather than pretending this is some heartwarming family reunion. How can you be so cold? My mother asked, tears now flowing freely. We're in crisis. Stephanie, we're about to lose everything. I understand that, I acknowledged. And I'm sorry you're facing financial difficulties. But I'm not going to pretend the past decade didn't happen just because you suddenly need my help. Brandon stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We fly all the way out here. And instead of being grateful for the chance to reconnect with your family, you're giving us the third degree about our motivations. Grateful. I repeated, incredulous. For what exactly? For you finally acknowledging my existence now that I might be useful to you. You know what your problem is, Stephanie? Brandon said, his voice rising. You've always had a chip on your shoulder. Always felt sorry for yourself because you weren't the favorite. Well, guess what? Grace and I worked hard for everything we got. We chose practical paths that contributed to the family, while you ran off to California to play artist. I stood up too, meeting his gaze steadily. I built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. I own this house outright. I employ people, create spaces that improve lives, and have accomplished everything I set out to do, all without a single dollar or word of encouragement from any of you. So don't talk to me about hard work or practical paths. Grace joined the fray, her voice tight with controlled anger. Not everything is about money, Stephanie. Some of us prioritized family over career. Some of us stayed close to home. Helped with mom and dad as they got older, showed up for family events year after year. You can't abandon your family for a decade and then act superior because you have a nice house. I didn't abandon anyone, I replied evenly. I was pushed away and then excluded. There's a difference. My father, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Enough of this. We came here because your Aunt Caroline told us about your success before she died. Said you were doing well out here, had your own company. We thought maybe you'd grown up enough to let bygones be bygones and help your family in a time of need. Clearly, we were wrong. The mention of Aunt Caroline sent a jolt through me. What exactly did she tell you? That you owned some fancy design firm, had important clients. That you'd shown us all, whatever that meant, he replied dismissively. I took a deep breath, studying myself. And it never occurred to any of you to reach out before now? To see this success for yourselves? To perhaps apologize for telling me I would fail? The silence that followed was answer enough. I think we all need some space right now, I finally said. You're welcome to stay as planned, I won't rescind that offer. But I won't be manipulated by sudden appeals to family loyalty after years of exclusion, and I certainly won't be investing in any business ventures without proper consideration. I left them in the living room and retreated to my bedroom suite, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or hurt. For the first time in my life, I had stood my ground with my family without apology or compromise. I had named the dynamics that had shaped our relationship for decades. I had refused to play the role they had always assigned me, the lesser child, the disappointment, the one who should be grateful for crumbs of attention. As I sat on the edge of my bed, I realized that tonight had changed everything. Whatever happened tomorrow or the days after, we could never go back to the unspoken agreements and polite fictions that had defined our relationship. The truth was finally out in the open, raw and uncomfortable but necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. How's it going with the family invasion? I smiled despite everything and typed back. The truth is finally being spoken. It's messy but liberating. His reply came quickly. Proud of you. Remember, boundaries aren't just walls to keep others out, they're foundations to build yourself up. With those words echoing in my mind, I prepared for bed, knowing that the coming days would require all my strength and clarity. This confrontation wasn't the end, but the beginning of a new phase, one where I would engage with my family not from a place of need or hope for approval, but from a position of self-worth and clear-eyed reality. Whatever came next, I was ready. The morning after our confrontation, breakfast was a silent, tense affair. My family moved around my kitchen like cautious strangers, careful not to meet my eyes or engage directly. I maintained a polite but distant demeanor, serving coffee and pointing out where everything was located before retreating to my home office to work. This pattern continued for several days, superficial civility masking the unresolved tension beneath. The children oblivious to adult conflicts. provided welcome distraction as they explored the house and garden with unbridled enthusiasm. On the fourth day, my mother knocked tentatively on my office door. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, looking smaller and older than I remembered. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, closing my laptop to give her my full attention. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began hesitantly, "about us never asking about your life or career. You're right. We didn't." I waited, not rushing to fill the uncomfortable silence. "I told myself it was because you were so far away, because you chose to leave," she continued. "But that's not entirely true. Part of me didn't want to know if you were succeeding because it would mean Dad was wrong," I finished for her. "And that you had supported the wrong child." She flinched but nodded. "We put everything into Grace's education because medicine seemed like the surest path to success. We supported Brandon taking over the business because it was what your father understood. Your dreams were unfamiliar territory." "That doesn't explain the exclusion," I pointed out. "The reunion, the family gatherings I was never told about. At first, it was just easier," she admitted. "Easier not to deal with the tension between you and your father. Then it became habit. And then too much time had passed to acknowledge the mistake without admitting how wrong you'd been," I suggested. "Something like that," she agreed quietly. "I'm not saying it was right. Just that it happened, choice by small choice, until there seemed no way back." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. I felt something tight in my chest loosen slightly. "I don't expect to undo 10 years of distance in a few days," I told her. "But I appreciate your honesty." The ice broken. Individual conversations began to happen throughout the following week. My father, predictably, was the most resistant to genuine dialogue. Instead, he wandered my house with a conflicted expression, simultaneously impressed by and resentful of my success. "Your business," he finally asked one evening as I worked at the dining table. "How did you get the startup capital?" "I didn't." "Not really," I explained. "I started with sweat equity, working for other designers, building a reputation, taking small projects and reinvesting everything. Aunt Caroline's gift helped me survive those first few months, but after that, it was just hard work and strategic choices." He nodded, digesting this. "No shortcuts then." "No shortcuts," I confirmed. "Just the path you told me would lead to failure." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was wrong about that, clearly. It was as close to an apology as I suspected he could manage. Brandon's approach was different. After a week of awkward avoidance, he cornered me in the kitchen late one night. "Look, I was out of line asking for investment like that," he admitted bluntly. "It was Dad's idea, but I went along with it." Pretty tone-deaf considering everything. Pretty tone-deaf, I agreed. But without heat. "The thing is," he continued, "seeing all this, what you've built, it's kind of a mind-blower, sis." "I always thought that I was the family failure," I suggested. "That you were choosing the hard path for no reason," he corrected. "That you were being stubborn rather than practical." "I never imagined," he gestured around at my home, "all this." "Most people don't," I replied. "Creative careers aren't understood by those who haven't lived them. But they can be just as viable, just as successful as conventional paths." "I'm getting that now," he acknowledged. "Too late, probably, but I'm getting it." The most surprising conversation came from Grace, who asked if I would walk with her around the neighborhood one crisp morning. "I've been jealous of you," she admitted as we climbed the hill behind my house. "For years." I nearly stumbled in shock. "Jealous? Of me? You were always the golden child." She laughed without humor. "The golden child with golden handcuffs. Do you know how much debt I have from medical school? How many hours I work? How little time I have with my children?" "But you always wanted to be a doctor," I said, confused. "I wanted to please Mom and Dad," she corrected. "And, don't get me wrong, I like medicine. But I never had the courage to ask myself what I truly wanted, to risk disappointment the way you did." "You chose yourself, Stephanie." "I never did." Her words stayed with me long after our walk, reshaping my understanding of our family dynamics. What I had seen as favoritism, she had experienced as expectation. What had seemed like support to me had felt like pressure to her. As Christmas approached, a tentative new normal began to emerge. We weren't suddenly a close-knit family, but the hostility had given way to cautious respect. The children's excitement for the holiday provided common ground, and I found myself enjoying their uninhibited delight in decorating my home. 2 days before Christmas, my mother approached me with an unexpected request. "We'd like to host Christmas dinner," she said. "Nothing fancy, just a small thank you for your hospitality. We'll handle everything." I agreed, curious to see what they had planned. Christmas Day arrived with the scent of cooking filling the house. My family had transformed my dining room with decorations they'd purchased secretly, combining their traditional elements with thoughtful nods to my aesthetic. The meal was a collaborative effort, my mother's traditional recipes alongside local California ingredients they'd researched. As we gathered around the table, my father cleared his throat. "Before we eat, I'd like to say something." He looked uncomfortable but determined. "Stephanie, none of us expected to find what we found when we came here. Not the house. Not the business success, but mostly not the person you've become. We did you a disservice 10 years ago, and we've compounded it since with our silence and exclusion." He paused, struggling visibly with words that didn't come easily to him. "I was wrong about your chosen path. Clearly, demonstrably wrong. I'm not good at apologies. But I am sorry for not believing in you when I should have." The table was silent, everyone watching for my reaction. 10 years ago, these words would have meant everything to me. Now, they were appreciated but no longer necessary for my sense of self-worth. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot to hear." The remainder of their stay had a different quality, less tense, more genuine. We weren't suddenly healed of all past hurts, but there was an authenticity to our interactions that had never existed before. After they returned to Michigan, individual relationships continued to develop in unexpected ways. My mother began calling regularly, actually asking questions about my work and life. My father remained more distant, but sent an awkward text when one of my projects was featured in a national magazine. "Saw your building design. Impressive work." Grace and I established a monthly video call, gradually building a relationship based on who we were now rather than who we had been. Brandon, after initially retreating to old patterns, surprised me by consulting me when he decided to launch a green building initiative at the family company. The most meaningful development came in April, when my mother called with a request. "We're thinking of having the family reunion at a neutral location this year," she said. "Somewhere everyone can travel to equally. Would you help us plan it? With your event design experience." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Some wounds were too deep to heal completely. Some patterns too ingrained to fully transform. But it was a beginning, a recognition that relationships can evolve if there's willingness on all sides. I agreed to help plan the reunion, with clear boundaries and expectations established from the start. It would be held in Chicago, the city Aunt Caroline had loved. At a boutique hotel I would design a special gathering space for. As I worked on the design for the reunion space, I realized I was creating something that embodied my journey, a place that honored the past without being constrained by it. That allowed for both connection and healthy separation, that was both welcoming and firmly bounded. The true victory wasn't in proving my family wrong or forcing them to acknowledge my success. It was in the freedom I had found along the way, freedom from seeking their approval, freedom from measuring my worth through their eyes. Freedom to create a life that honored my authentic self regardless of their ability to see its value. Standing in my living room on the evening after finalizing the reunion plans, I looked out at the twinkling lights of the Bay Area and felt a profound sense of peace. The frightened, hurt young woman who had fled Michigan a decade ago could never have imagined this outcome, not just the external success, but the internal strength and clarity that had come with it. The path hadn't been easy. There had been nights of doubt, moments of loneliness, times when the weight of familial rejection had seemed too heavy to bear. But each challenge had forged something valuable within me: resilience, self-trust, the ability to create family among friends and community among colleagues. I no longer needed my parents to believe in me because I fully believed in myself. I no longer craved my siblings' respect because I had earned my own. The validation I had once desperately sought from them had ultimately come from within, and from the life I had courageously built. That, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all, that true freedom comes not from proving others wrong, but from living so authentically that their opinions, right or wrong, no longer define your sense of self. That real success isn't measured in houses or businesses or magazine features, but in the courage to honor your own path, especially when those who should support you cannot or will not. As I prepare to meet my family again at the reunion, I do so not as the excluded outsider or the triumphant success story, but simply as myself, a woman who found her way not despite rejection but because of it. A woman who learned that sometimes the greatest gift family can give you is the opportunity to discover who you are beyond their expectations and limitations. Have you ever had to forge your own path despite lack of support from those closest to you? Has proving someone wrong ever led you to discoveries about yourself you might otherwise never have made? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've transformed challenges into stepping stones for growth. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that rejection can sometimes be the beginning of the most beautiful journey of self-discovery. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the people who don't believe in your dreams are the ones who inadvertently give you the strongest motivation to achieve them.